What if everything you thought you knew about life in the ancient world was only a small piece of a much larger, far more dangerous reality? And what if stepping into the world of the Old Testament, just for one day, would test not only your strength but your very soul? Have you ever wondered what it would truly feel like to walk through the world of the Old Testament, not as an observer reading a verse, but as a living, breathing person standing under its blazing sun, hearing its prophets' warnings and witnessing its miracles and judgments with your own eyes? Most people imagine the ancient biblical world as something distant, wrapped in the warm glow of storybooks, a place of shepherds on quiet hillsides, of prophets in flowing robes, of ancient temples rising beneath golden skies. A simpler time, a slower world, perhaps even a gentler one. But the truth is far more intense. The world of the Old Testament was not a quiet, peaceful era frozen in sacred pages. It was a world roaring with conflict between nations, between kings, between spiritual forces, and even within the hearts of ordinary people trying to survive the demands of covenant life. It was a world where every choice felt heavier, where faith was not a comfortable idea, but the very difference between survival and destruction. Today, as we begin our journey together, I want you to imagine stepping into that world, not as a distant reader, but as someone suddenly dropped into the dust and danger of life 3,000 years ago. The air is thick with heat. The smell of smoke and sacrifice lingers. The sound of livestock bleats from every direction. Your modern instincts, your assumptions about safety, justice, and comfort, all of them begin to crumble the moment your feet touch the ground. Because in the Old Testament world, nothing was simple. A single day here could break you. Not because the people were cruel or the culture was primitive, but because the environment itself demanded a kind of strength we rarely need today, a rugged combination of physical endurance, emotional resilience, and spiritual clarity. Even the small details of daily life, fetching water, grinding grain, surviving the desert heat, were grueling tasks by our modern standards. Then add the constant uncertainty, raiding tribes, warring kingdoms, unpredictable weather patterns that could destroy food supplies, sudden outbreaks of disease, and a looming presence of nations far more powerful than Israel. And yet, for all its hardship, the Old Testament world was also a place of breathtaking beauty, divine encounters, and moments where heaven seemed to touch earth. It was a time when miracles did not feel like stories. They felt like survival, when blessings were literal and judgments were unforgettable, when obedience was a matter of life, and disobedience carried consequences that echoed through generations. But let's pause for a moment, because before we step deeper into this ancient world, we need to understand one truth. To survive even 24 hours in the Old Testament, you must let go of everything you assume about comfort, convenience, and safety. You must enter with the mindset of someone living under covenant law, tribal loyalty, and divine authority. You must see through the eyes of people whose daily lives were shaped by rituals, laws, sacrifices, and a fierce awareness of the unseen spiritual realm. And so, our journey begins, not with a battle, not with a miracle, but with something more subtle and far more revealing. White medium star walk into a world that doesn't slow down for you. The moment you arrive, the world around you is already in motion. Farmers are working from sunrise to sunset. Women are drawing water long before dawn breaks. Shepherds are guiding their flocks through rugged hills, and traders are negotiating for goods brought from distant kingdoms. Everything is loud, dusty, and intensely alive. But there's something else, an underlying tension that never seems to disappear. Every family, every tribe, every leader lives with a constant awareness that they belong to a covenantal relationship with the God of Israel, a relationship filled with blessing, responsibility, and consequences. You're not just walking into a culture. You're walking into a divine agreement, and the weight of that agreement is visible everywhere. On doorposts marked with symbols of faith, on altars where sacrifices burn morning and evening, in the clothing, the rituals, the greetings, in the way people speak about God, not casually, but with reverence, fear, or awe. And as you watch, you begin to understand why the Old Testament world was both beautiful and dangerous. Because here, the spiritual world is not abstract. It is intertwined with daily survival. Rain is not just weather. It is blessing. Drought is not misfortune. It is judgment. Victory in battle is not strategy. It is divine favor. Defeat is not failure. It is a spiritual wake-up call. Every event, every outcome, every detail of life is interpreted through the lens of covenant faithfulness. And as you absorb all this, you begin to realize something. Living here requires more than strength. It requires constant awareness, physical, social, and spiritual. But the day has only begun. Now, to understand this world more deeply, let's step into hard community life, where ordinary people, not kings or prophets, reveal what survival truly meant. White medium-star daily life, beautiful, raw, and unforgiving. The first thing you notice is the pace. There's no such thing as free time. Every waking moment has a purpose. Grinding, weaving, fetching, preparing, repairing, defending. Every action is done by hand, with tools made from stone, wood, or bronze. Your muscles ache just watching. And then there is the climate. Imagine the crushing heat of the Judean wilderness, the sharp chill of desert nights, the sudden, violent storms that sweep across the Mediterranean coast, the long, agonizing droughts that turn rivers into dust and fields into cracked earth. Nature itself is a constant test, and you, placed in the middle of it, begin to feel the pressure, the dryness in your throat, the heaviness in the air, the relentless sun that gives no relief. But even this isn't the hardest part. The hardest part is the emotional weight of living in a world where community is everything. Your identity is not individual, it's tribal. Decisions are not private, they affect your entire household. Honor is not optional, it is survival. A single mistake, a moment of carelessness, a disrespectful action can bring shame, conflict, or even punishment. And over it all hangs another reality. The spiritual world, believed to be active, watchful, and powerful. This is the part of the journey where most modern people would struggle, because the Old Testament world demands a kind of spiritual awareness we rarely experience today. People prayed not because it was routine, but because it was necessary. They obeyed not because of tradition, but because disobedience could result in drought, disease, or defeat. Faith wasn't a concept. It was the oxygen of the culture. And now, with all of this weighing on you, we move into the next phase of your 24-hour experience, understanding the laws, customs, and cultural expectations that define ancient life. Because survival here doesn't depend only on strength or faith. It also depends on knowledge. Knowledge of what to do, what not to do, where to go, whom to trust, and how to behave in a world where every detail has meaning. And that brings us to the turning point of our introduction, the moment where curiosity meets challenge. A moment where you, standing at the edge of ancient Israel, must ask yourself, could I truly make it through even one full day in this world? Because what comes next, the laws, the rituals, the dangers, the miracles, is a journey that determines the answer. And now, step with me into the heart of that world as we begin the first major chapter of the story. As we step deeper into this ancient world, the dust of the village still clinging to your feet and the weight of history settling on your shoulders, something becomes unmistakably clear. Life in the Old Testament is not a collection of disconnected scenes. It is a living tapestry, woven from duty, fear, devotion, struggle, and community. And in this tapestry, every thread matters. You're not merely passing through. You're beginning to feel what it means to belong here, even if only for a single day. And so, our journey continues. White medium star eye, entering the rhythm of covenant life. The first sound that greets you as you walk further into the village is not the clang of metal or the cries of merchants. It is the steady rhythm of prayer. Before work begins, before tools are lifted, before any conversation unfolds, families pause to acknowledge the God who governs every moment of their existence. Fathers speak blessings over their households. Mothers whisper quiet petitions for strength. Children listen with wide, attentive eyes, because they know this is not ritual for ritual's sake. This is survival. Even the simplest prayer feels heavier, more urgent, and somehow more alive than anything you might be used to. Because here, there is no separation between the spiritual and the practical. The covenant ties everything together. Life flows through it. Discipline is shaped by it. Hope depends on it. And as you watch, try to absorb the meaning behind every gesture, every whispered word, you begin to realize why the people of this world live with a constant awareness of the divine. Faith here is not believed. It is breathed. White medium star 2. The harsh reality of work and survival. It doesn't take long before the rhythm shifts. Prayers give way to motion, and motion gives way to the unrelenting work that defines life in the ancient world. A woman leads you toward the grinding stone, and the sight alone is enough to exhaust you. Grain must be crushed daily by hand to produce flour for bread. The stone is heavy, the motion repetitive, the process endless. Her arms are strong, her face focused, yet she offers a gentle smile as she works. This is life, her expression seems to say, and life must continue. Step outside the house, and you're greeted by the clamor of men repairing tools made of bronze and iron. Blades dull quickly in this harsh landscape. Nothing is taken for granted. Everything must be maintained, sharpened, or rebuilt. Children gather wood for cooking fires. Shepherds begin guiding their flocks to grazing grounds far from the village, and young men prepare themselves to patrol nearby routes, because danger is never far away. Survival is a community project. Everyone has a role, and the absence of one person's contribution is felt by all. In this moment, you understand why the scriptures so often emphasize unity. In a world this demanding, isolation is impossible. Life is shared, and responsibility is shared with it. 3. The constant threats of an ancient land. But work alone does not define the Old Testament world. Threats, both seen and unseen, shape the contours of daily life. 1. Nature as an unpredictable opponent. The heat grows merciless as the day progresses. Your clothes cling to you. Sweat stings your eyes. The ground beneath your feet radiates heat like a furnace. You've read about drought in ancient Israel, but the field is different. Rivers shrink, wells dry, crops fail, and the people understand that weather is not simply weather. It is communication. Blessing brings rain. Warning brings drought. The land itself seems to watch the people and reflect their spiritual condition. 2. Animals and predators. From the hills, shepherds keep careful watch. Wolves, lions, and bears once roamed these regions, preying on vulnerable flocks. A single moment of distraction can cost a family its livelihood. It is no accident that Scripture calls God a shepherd. In this world, shepherding is not peaceful. It is warfare. 3. Enemy nations. Look toward the horizon, and you'll see distant dust clouds. Sometimes traders, sometimes travelers, and sometimes enemies. Israel is surrounded by rival nations. Philistines, Moabites, Arameans, Edomites, each with their own gods, armies, and ambitions. People live with the tension of knowing that peace can shift to war in a single season. And yet, despite all this danger, the people continue working, trusting, living, not because they are fearless, but because faith gives them the courage to move forward. White medium star 4. Social structure, the weight of community and honor. Let's move deeper into the heart of the village, where social life unfolds like a living classroom. As you observe the interactions around you, you begin to recognize a pattern. Community is not optional. It's life. 1. Family is foundation. Households are multi-generational. Grandparents, parents, children, even distant relatives live under one roof or within one courtyard. Decisions are made collectively. Wisdom is passed down from the oldest to the youngest. Honor flows upward. Responsibility flows downward. The stories you read in Scripture, stories of inheritance, blessings, disputes, alliances, suddenly feel more vivid. They're not abstract ideas. They're the heartbeat of the culture. 2. Elders and authority. At the center of the village sit a gathering place where elders meet to judge disputes and guide the community. There's no police force, no court system as you know it. Authority rests in the hands of wise men, entrusted with preserving justice and order. Their decisions shape the destiny of families. Their counsel directs the moral compass of the village. Their presence creates stability. When you watch them deliberate, you quickly realize why the Scriptures place such emphasis on wisdom. Here, wisdom is not intellectual. It is the difference between peace and chaos. 3. Hospitality and mutual protection. Walk through the village at midday, and you'll be offered water or a small portion of bread. Hospitality is not a courtesy. It is a sacred duty. In a hostile environment, Strangers are vulnerable, and God's people are expected to extend care. Likewise, protection is communal. If one home is threatened, the entire village responds. Every life is tied to another. This interdependence shapes every decision people make. No one is truly alone, and no action is without consequence. White Medium Star V. The spiritual atmosphere, a world alive with the invisible. By now, you're beginning to feel the physical strain of this world, but its spiritual intensity is what truly sets it apart. In the Old Testament, the unseen realm is not distant or theoretical. It is constant, immediate, and deeply felt. 1. Rituals with real meaning. You follow a group of villagers to a simple altar outside the town. A small offering is presented, grain, oil, or perhaps a young animal. Every movement is deliberate. Every action carries weight. Here, sacrifice is not symbolic. It is covenant maintenance. It is relationship. You witness the seriousness in the faces around you, the awareness that obedience is not casual, that reverence is not optional. God's presence is not imagined. It is feared, respected, and pursued. 2. The sense of divine nearness. Unlike modern life, where people often question the nearness of God, the people of this era feel his presence frequently through blessings, judgments, signs, and the words of prophets. A strong harvest is proof of his favor. A sudden plague is interpreted as discipline. A military victory is celebrated as divine intervention. Even silence from heaven is considered meaningful. 3. Prophets as God's messengers. Later in the day, you find yourself among a small crowd gathered to hear a prophet speak. His voice carries a tone of urgency, part warning, part invitation. He calls the people back to faithfulness, reminding them of God's promises and expectations. You realize something profound. Prophets were not distant religious figures. They were lifelines, voices that helped the people interpret their circumstances and stay aligned with the covenant. Seeing the prophet speak with such conviction, you understand why his words carry immense influence and why ignoring them came at great cost. White Medium Star 6. Evening in the ancient world, community, reflection, and hope. As the sun dips behind the hills, the atmosphere shifts. The heat eases. Shadows stretch across the village. Families gather to prepare their evening meal. This is perhaps the moment when you feel closest to the people around you, not because you share their language or customs, but because you sense the heartbeat of their lives. Children laugh as they chase one another. Mothers pour water into clay jars. Fathers discuss the day's events as they sit near the entrance of their homes. Life is hard, undeniably so, but it is also filled with warmth and simplicity. A pot of lentils simmers over fire. The smell of bread fills the air, and the first stars shine overhead as if blessing the village with their gentle glow. Family stories by firelight. After dinner, families gather outside their homes. This is when stories are told. Stories of Abraham, Moses, Deborah, David, and Ruth. Stories of faith and failure, of triumph and tragedy, passed from one generation to the next. These stories are not entertainment. They are identity. They anchor the people to their past and guide them toward their future. And as you sit among them, listening to a father recount how God led Israel out of Egypt, you feel an unexpected sense of belonging, not because you are one of them, but because the human experience, even across centuries, remains recognizable. People long for hope, for meaning, for connection, for something greater than themselves. And in this ancient world, all those longings are intertwined with the presence of God. 7. The weight of the day settles in. Night deepens. The fire crackles softly. A cool breeze drifts through the village, and you suddenly feel the full weight of your 24 hours here. Your body aches from the heat, the dust, the walking. Your mind spins from all the customs, expectations, and spiritual awareness. Your heart carries a new appreciation for the people who lived through these times. People whose faith wasn't shaped by convenience but by necessity. You realize something powerful. Surviving in the Old Testament isn't about strength. It's about surrender. It's about trust. It's about walking in a world where God's presence is real, His laws are clear, and His protection is essential. In this world, you can't make it alone. And you're not meant to. The day closes not with fear, but with peace. The peace of knowing that despite the dangers, despite the hardships, you are held by the same God who held them. The stars shimmer above you like scattered promises. Light flickers from the last embers of the fire. And as your eyes grow heavy, you understand something profound. The ancient world may have been harsher, but faith in that world was also deeper. And now, standing at the threshold between this long day and the next phase of our journey, we prepare to step into yet another dimension of understanding. The kind of understanding that will bring everything together. The kind that reveals the heart behind the laws, the meaning behind the struggles, and the purpose behind the stories. Because our journey is far from over, and the conclusion will take us even deeper into the mystery, the beauty, and the challenge of walking the world of the Old Testament. Night has fully settled over the ancient village, yet something inside you remains awake, alert, thoughtful, unwilling to let go of the day you've just lived. For hours, you walk beneath the same sun that beat down on the ancestors of faith, breathe the same dry wind, touch the same rough earth, and listen to stories that survived thousands of years. But all of that was only the beginning, because as the last embers of the fire glow softly and the stars shine with almost supernatural clarity, you begin to sense a truth rising quietly in your heart, something deeper than fatigue, stronger than curiosity. This world has something to teach you, not as a historian studies the past, but as a traveler is changed by a journey. And so our conclusion begins here, in the quiet of ancient night, where the noise of the day fades and wisdom finally has room to speak. White medium star eye, what the ancient world reveals about us. As you rest on a woven blanket beside the fading fire, you replay the events of the day in your mind, the prayers at dawn, the grueling labor, the constant threats, the communal strength, the spiritual urgency. The stories pass from one generation to the next, and you realize something surprising. The Old Testament world wasn't built on comfort. It was built on clarity. People knew who they were. They knew whom they belonged to. They knew why they prayed, why they worked, why they sacrificed, why they obeyed. Their lives were not easy, but they were anchored. Their days were not calm, but they were meaningful. Their world was dangerous, but it was spiritually alive. As you examine your own modern world, full of distraction, noise, endless demands, and shifting values, you begin to sense the contrast. We have more comfort, but less clarity. More convenience, but less connection. More knowledge, but less wisdom. And this, more than anything, is what your 24 hours in the Old Testament reveals. The ancient world may challenge your strength, but awakens your soul. It strips away illusions. It exposes what truly matters. It forces you to see life through the eyes of people whose faith was forged in hardship. And perhaps that is what we've been missing. White medium star 2. Lessons hidden in the hardship. As midnight approaches, the village becomes still. The only sounds are the distant bleats of sheep and the soft rustle of wind across the rooftops. In this silence, the hardships of the day take on new meaning. 1. Great faith is born in great need. When you witness morning prayers, you sense a desperation that felt holy, a dependence that modern life rarely requires of us. In the ancient world, faith was not an optional part of life. It was life. People prayed because they needed God to move. They depended on Him for rain, for protection, for justice, for guidance. Their faith was rugged, practical, and woven into the fabric of their daily struggles. And you begin to wonder, has our comfort weakened our faith? Has convenience replaced dependence? Has noise drowned out the voice that once guided generations? Maybe hardship isn't something we should always run from. Maybe it is a teacher. 2. Community is strength, not burden. You watch children gather wood, elders settle disputes, and families share every meal. You saw men stand guard not for themselves, but for one another. You witnessed how much they relied on unity to survive a world that offered little mercy. And you realize something we often forget. Isolation is a modern luxury and a modern curse. In ancient Israel, you couldn't survive alone. And maybe, deep down, neither can we. We weren't created for solitary strength. We were designed for shared burdens, shared stories, shared victories. The Old Testament world reminds us that community is not confinement, it's protection. 3. Holiness is not restriction, it is relationship. Throughout the day, you witness rituals, sacrifices, and prayers that seem unfamiliar at first. But the more you observed, the more you understood that these were not empty rituals. They were the people's way of staying close to God in a world filled with danger and uncertainty. Their obedience was an expression of love. Their sacrifices were expressions of dependence. Their rituals were reminders of presence. Holiness wasn't a rule book. It was a pathway to relationship. And suddenly, the ancient laws began to look less like restrictions and more like invitations. The prophet's cry echoes into the night. As you reflect, a faint memory of the prophet's voice from earlier in the day rises in your mind. His warnings, his urgency, his call to faithfulness. And for the first time, you understand why prophets spoke with fire in their voices. They weren't trying to impress. They weren't trying to create followers. They weren't trying to promote themselves. They were trying to save a people who lived on the razor's edge between blessing and destruction. Their words carried weight because the stakes were real. Their warnings mattered because consequences were immediate. And as the night deepens, you feel a stir within you, a question you didn't expect. Do the prophets still speak today? Not with new words, but through the old ones we've forgotten to hear? Maybe their warnings weren't just for ancient Israel. Maybe they echo across time, searching for ears willing to listen. White medium star 4. Dawn approaches, the gift of perspective. Hours pass, and the sky begins to shift from black to deep indigo. The stars fade. The village stirs. Roosters call out into the cool air. You have survived the night. But survival wasn't the point. Perspective was. And as dawn breaks, you finally see the ancient world for what it truly is. Not a distant chapter in history, but a mirror revealing what we've lost and what we still desperately need. You realize that while the world has changed, the human heart has not. We still long for meaning. We still crave connection. We still depend on God, whether we acknowledge it or not. And the lessons from your 24 hours here are not meant to stay in this ancient world. They are meant to travel with you back into your modern life. White medium star V. The final walk through the village. As the sun rises, you take one last walk through the village. The air is cool. People begin their morning tasks. Children chase each other between clay homes. Women prepare food. Men gather tools. Shepherds direct their flocks toward the hills. Everything is normal. Everything is ordinary. And yet, everything feels sacred. You realize that holiness wasn't limited to the temple. It was hidden in the rhythms of daily life, in the grinding stone, in the shepherd's staff, in the welcoming smile, in the evening fire, in the stories told beneath the stars. And suddenly, the ancient world feels less foreign, less distant, less unreachable, because you finally understand God was not only in the miracles, He was in the moments, everyday moments, small moments, ordinary moments, and He still is. White medium star 6. What this journey leaves you with. As you prepare to leave this ancient world and step back into your own, 3 truths settle quietly in your heart. Truths that feel less like knowledge and more like revelation. 1. The Old Testament isn't a story about the past. It's a story about us. Its people are our people. Their fears are our fears. Their doubts are our doubts. Their victories echo our victories. Their God is our God. The world has changed, but the human soul hasn't, and the God who walked with them still walks with us. 2. Faith must be lived, not observed. You've seen faith in its rawest form, expressed not in comfort but in crisis, not in theory but in survival. Faith is not passive. It is active. It is gritty. It is persistent. It is deeply personal. And perhaps the greatest challenge we face today is learning how to carry that same depth of faith into a world that tries to numb us with ease. 3. We need the ancient world more than ever. Not the dangers, not the suffering, not the constant threats, but the clarity, the wisdom, the grounding, the awareness of God's nearness, the humility of dependence, the strength of community. Because in our world of constant noise, these ancient rhythms remind us how to hear again. White medium star 7. Your final sunrise in the Old Testament. The moment arrives. Your 24 hours are ending. You stand at the edge of the village as sunlight sweeps across the land. The desert glows gold. The sky opens wide. And for one last time, you look at the world that shaped the scriptures. You breathe in the air of a time long gone, yet strangely familiar. You feel the weight of thousands of years resting gently on your shoulders. You listen to the laughter of children, and the quiet murmurs of prayer, and the footsteps of shepherds heading toward the hills. And you feel gratitude, not just for the journey, but for the invitation it brings. The invitation to live with deeper awareness, to walk with stronger faith, to build richer community, to listen more closely to the ancient words that have survived time itself. And as you turn to leave, one final truth settles into your heart, the truth that ties together everything you've seen, everything you felt, everything you've learned. You may not survive the Old Testament world for long, but the wisdom of that world can strengthen you for the one you live in now. And that might be the greatest blessing of all.